Good morning, everybody. For those of you in an appropriate time zone on the western side of the continent, good afternoon for those of you for a little bit further east. I'm super excited today. We've got a little fireside chat. We've got a couple great panelists here. We're talking about how to get your product to market faster. That's always a question. We don't want to be slow. We want to use the resources, the skills, the things that are already out there. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to rebuy pieces of equipment. We don't want to relearn lessons that somebody else knows. And that's why I'm really excited to have the three folks we have on the call here, because that is both what they bring experience about, what they kind of offer to the market, and hopefully we'll have some great lessons from them on the topic. Before I get started, I do want to sort of do a quick land acknowledgement. From Foresight, we are across the country, and we do want to recognize the many ceded and unceded lands on which we operate. Myself, I'm in Vancouver right now, and I'm on the unceded territory of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations. With that, I will get started, and I think let's get right down to it. If you have any questions, please do put them in the chat, right? Get that little chat box going. This is, as always, for your benefit, right? Nobody ever shows up to Foresight events to talk to me. Hurts my feelings a bit, but it's the truth. So if you have sort of things that are burning questions for these folks, do feel free to put them in that little question and answer box, and that helps us make sure that we get them all addressed. Without further ado, I'm going to go through our panelists today, ask them what it is they do, tell us a little about themselves, and then we'll jump into the discussion. I'm going to start with Sebastian Alamillo from the Reaction Hub.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me, Stephen. It's always a pleasure to be working with Foresight and to contribute to such great conversations. I'm always learning when I'm here. So yeah, my background, I was a founder from about 2015 till 2020 doing grid level energy storage for those, for lack of a better word, it's big ass batteries. And we took that from, lab scale all the way to full commercial pilots, where we were doing about 2 megawatts of energy storage. We raised about $50 million and grew the company to about 34 people. When we exited, I had realized that the experience was one of the toughest of my life, and I could only imagine that I wasn't alone because I had a whole bunch of friends that had gone through it. And so I devoted the rest of my career to making that process easier, both for the mental health of the entrepreneur, but also for the velocity of innovation so that we can get more sustainable technologies into the market faster. So now my first role kind of doing that was as a VC, but also as working for KPM Accelerate and developing a program there that worked on techno-economic analysis. So understanding how your chemistry relates to your money. And now I work as the executive director of the Reaction Hub, which is a new centralized facility based in Kingston, Ontario, that will provide new lab and specifically piloting capacity to Canada so that we can keep more companies in Canada, growing in Canada, and scaling in Canada.
Fantastic. So Sebastian, I heard you use the word chemistry at least 2 or 3 times there. So it seems like that's a thread through both your own personal experience and then what you do at the Reaction Hub. I'll turn over to Billy Rideout at Exergy. You want to tell us a little bit about how you came to be at Exergy and what the kind of mission is at Exergy, and maybe a little bit. I like the altruistic bent of Sebastian's kind of mission. So if you do have one in your own personal journey, feel free to share that too.
Sure. Like Sebastian, I'm a chemical engineer by trade, so there's the chemistry link. So I hear you, brother. I would say started Exergy about 7 years ago, and it was really about solving problems for a better world. So essentially, there's so many exciting startups and clean tech companies that are trying to launch some processes or products that we try to get excited about their idea and help them bring it to market. And we also create a very essential connection to larger industry players, big industry players in the energy sector that might be adopters or scalers of this technology. So it's been an exciting ride, and we love to get on the same journey as a lot of our customers, and because there's lots of pain points when you're trying to change the world, and it's a big load. I would say, when I came out of university in chemical engineering, but I'm very mechanically inclined, love to build things. I I won a couple of awards for this thing that I made called the Billy Bar Hopper. And it was a thing that went on the back of a boat, and you could basically a lever and it would lift the motor so it wouldn't like ruin the riverbed and kind of affect fish spawning and all that. And so I've always had ideas and loves to put them into place, but now it's even more exciting that I can help others with their ideas.
Fantastic. And Billy, what kind of toys do you have at Exergy? I'm cheating here because we've chatted before. What does the Christmas list look like from the last couple of years that Santa delivered to the Exergy folks?
Well, we've got to remind the team that it's not necessarily toys, it's tools, and we got to monetize them. And because we've dropped a lot of money on some really cool, we'll call them toys because you started. So, 3D printers, metal 3D printers, big plastic 3D printers that can manufacture products in the thousands. And these things look like real products. They don't look like, there's no lines in them, right? And they're really strong. And so, we ended up being Western Canada's largest kind of 3D printing company focused on energy and the West, like Alberta and BC. But yeah, there's lots of machines, 3D printers the size of cars and minivans, is kind of what we're shooting for, because these are the machines that we need in Canada to be competitive at the world scale.
Okay, fantastic. And if I just send you my daughter's Christmas list, is that at all? Can we work something out here? We can talk about that later.
We have printed Christmas ornaments. Maybe we'll leave it at that. Yeah.
All right. And Souvik, last round to you and FYELABS. You want to talk a little bit about your own story and then what FYELABS does? Oh, you're on mute.
Yes. Isn't that the most famous phrase of last couple of years? You're on mute. So yeah, very good afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much, Stephen, for inviting me. So a little bit about me. My name is Souvik. I'm one of the founder and vice president at FYELABS. What FYELABS does is basically when you're a startup, you have 10,000 things to worry about. What we take out of your plate is the technological aspect of your business. So product development and all the kind of technology or the technical challenges associated with product development. We just take it off the founder's plate. And originally started this kind of operation from within McMaster University around like 5-6 years ago. That's in the East Coast. If you don't know Mac, it's one of the biggest top 3, I would say, in Canada. What we realized is that, so I have a PhD from another life. I don't do academic research anymore, but when me and the other co-founders ended up in Mac, we saw that the University of Mac size is great in collaborating with the Cisco's and the IBM's and the General Motors of the world. And they have like, in fact, multi-million-dollar grants running in like research centers and whatnot. But the startups, the small, medium businesses, they were kind of priced out or left out. So we wanted to change that equation because there's brilliant ideas that these folks are bringing on, and they look forward, they look up to these universities as kind of ivory towers of knowledge, so to speak, and they just get help. But the universities have very dated IP policies, and they would take months to negotiate, contract and things like that. So we thought this needs to change. So we, back in 2016, we created a department within Faculty of Engineering at Mac, and we used to call it CIRC, Computing Infrastructure Research Center. It's a mouthful, but the idea was to kind of build products for startups and small, medium businesses. So people bring ideas, we convert them into proof of concepts, prototypes, minimum viable products within like a span of few weeks. And that's how it'll work. And then obviously all the IP that the founders bring would belong to them. And if we generate some IP during the process, that will also belong to the founders. So we do not participate in the IP game at all. So that was kind of the idea. And it became really successful with the local companies in Greater Toronto area. And then it started kind of like diffusing outwards from Toronto and then other parts of Canada, US, even like Middle East and Asia. So over the next 5 years, we build like hundreds of products for different companies. And then Max said, hey, you guys like operating for profit business, you should spin out. So early 2021, we spun out. And since then we're operating as FYELABS. But yeah, so that's that. I mean, we operate in 6 areas right now. So we have a software team, we have a kind of a hardware team with custom like electronics, mechanical, electrical engineers. Then we have like a robotics division with mechatronics people, computer vision people, and we also have AI ML algorithms people. And finally, computational modeling. So computational fluid dynamics, radio frequency simulations and stuff like that. So yeah, so that's kind of in our story. It's been like 1.5 years so far as a company itself. But as an operation, we're like 6 years old.
Fantastic. Okay. Souvik, I was probably going to bring it up towards the end, but you mentioned it, so I'm just going to dive right in here. You mentioned intellectual property. You mentioned all that intellectual property sort of stays with the venture. That's your policy. And so I'm definitely going to ask the other folks around the room here. But Souvik, I tell the ventures, like, that IP, your trade secrets, your patents, like that's probably the nut of your business, right? Like it's part of it can be your team and the engineers and the know-how you build, but you're asking people to take this secret sauce, this magic idea and the formula and the work they put into, and then they show it to you?
Well, yes, to some extent, at least. I can actually cite specific examples where people can get creative in these collaborations. But yeah, to some extent, for any effective collaboration, there has to be some sharing back and forth of some trade secrets or intellectual property, because otherwise it's very difficult to build technology for someone if they don't. So for example, I can't exactly say the name of the customer, but this person was trying to build a reactor, let's say, and because Sebastian and Billy, both of you are chemical engineers, so you would know this very well. So this person was trying to build a chemical reactor, and in chemical process modeling, there's something called like a process flow diagram, PFD, which basically has all the ingredients, right? So what ingredients in what ratio and proportion mixed in, what sense. So they said, you know what, you don't worry about this. We are not comfortable sharing our process flow diagrams exactly. What you worry about is there are like 7 ingredients, and you don't need to know what the ingredients are, but the job is to design a control system. So all you need to do is to know what's the flow rate, what's the pressure, what's the size, and stuff like that. So this way they kind of separated out some aspect. Of course, there is still a bit of proprietary control algorithm that needs to be developed, but that's one step removed from the actual ingredients. That's just one example how people can protect it.
Right. So you really work with people to make sure that they're comfortable and protecting their IP. Not only do you let them keep any intellectual property you develop, yes, they get the rights to that, but also you want to give them a lot of comfort and work with them to both be able to do your job, but also make them kind of feel comfortable. Sure. Sebastian, yes. I see you kind of nodding along there. What's kind of the Reaction Hub's experience that, or what was your experience on the other side of the table when you were a startup, kind of having that fear of opening up Pandora's box for strangers?
Well, I mean, you're right. That is Pandora's box, because it's the value of most of the S&P 500 right now is in a lot. I think 60% of their value is in intangibles, which is either your brand or it's your IP. So both of those need to be pretty protected as you grow, right? So for us, I'm as founder friendly as possible, given that that's my experience and my where my positioning of my background. So we don't take any equity, we don't take any IP. It's hands off. But when I was doing more contract research side of things, I think we just said, okay, let's go for it. There are tools in place, right? Good NDAs, good trust, but also making sure that you parse out, okay, you need really good CTO, or you need somebody in your organization that is an engineer that has the core competency and is the technical leader. But the rest of it, you don't have to be an expert in everything. If you have one good person internally that has the secret sauce, why, and they're, in the example of a reactor, and they're they're a chem-eng, they're a chemist, why does that chemist have to also be an expert in PLS or PCL? the proper control systems associated with it. You don't have to. It's outsource it, please, for the love of God. I didn't, and that's why we had a team of 34. That killed my burn rate. I had to raise far more money. I had to have more infrastructure to support the staff that I didn't need. And you have to hire them at a 1-year contract at minimum. And I needed them for like 6 to 8 weeks of work. So I'm finding and inventing work, which takes work in and of itself for the people that don't need to be there. So knowing what is core competency versus what can be outsourced is a good distinction for your cash flow perspective and for your value side. If you have that under wraps, then collaborating is the most efficient way to get from point A to point B.
Awesome. Sebastian used an interesting word there, trust. Billy, how do you sort of build trust with the potential clients, or how does Exergy sort of address that IP question?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously everything starts with a NDA or a mutual NDA. Sometimes in my case, we bring some 3D printing IP to the table, but generally speaking, their IP is their IP, and we just help them co-develop things. And it's been great. But building trust, yeah, they want to show you. We get a lot of process flow diagrams, and we help them with it. I think it's about transparency too, because what I find is that, you know, the entrepreneur brings a lot of passion for innovation, for a new idea. And often when we connect them with a bigger industrial player that may want to scale their technology, we have to sometimes talk them off the ledge around certain paradigms that they think, because they've been working in their garage for, you know, X amount of time, they're pretty set in their ways sometimes, and they're not open to understanding their customer, understanding the pain points of their customer, and really maybe slightly pivoting or pivoting their idea in a major way. So we kind of have to break them down and build them up all at the same time. And I think that is about being very transparent and letting them know what we see as positives and flaws in their design, because they are picking up some other individuals that can help them on their journey, and they need to kind of understand that now they're sharing this journey. And that's a hard move forward sometimes for some entrepreneurs. So that trust building, it happens through delivering results, I think, with them. I would say getting a win, an MVP experiment. Yeah, that was great. We learned something, you know, learning together, collaborating. I know it sounds a lot like just cliche words, teamwork, collaboration, but at the end of the day, if they can achieve something together, trust will be built through working and delivering together.
Yeah, and I mean, for me, my involvement is that I've seen sort of people who keep their cards too close to their chest, right? And as a result, can't collaborate. And, you know, not to pick on Sebastian and his hiring all the people instead of outsourcing it, right? I want to see people getting the best advice, you know, understanding that everyone here, you're doing this multiple times a day. Your interest isn't in stealing people's IP. It's honestly in moving them forward. Like, that's the business. And you do this every day. And if you had a reputation of stealing people's IP, you wouldn't be in business at all, or for very long, right? And so, you know, it is a trusted business model, I would say. So I hope that comes across, Billy, because you're right. People do need to open up to let you help them.
If I may add one more point, Stephen, on this. So oftentimes we tell people that it's what makes a startup successful is oftentimes not its technology at all. It's the understanding of their customer base, it's understanding of the product market fit, and all of these things, right? So, and proper timing the technology to the market need and stuff like that. So they should focus their energy on that aspect. And you know, the technology is technology. I mean, if you build the product, somebody, if they really want to understand what's it, they can reverse engineer it all they want. You know, there are tools out there. So that's not what they should really spend a lot of energy on. That's what we believe.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, because, you know, I'm kind of a salesman as my background. So thank you for adding some value to what I do. There was another kind of topic that Sebastian kind of brought up that I wanted to dig into a little bit more, and that's maybe product development, and sort of what is that process of, you know, identifying what's in-house, what can be out of house, identifying what you need that's core to the business for multiple years, what's a 6 to 8 week need. Really broadly, and I mean, all of you get to see this done by a bunch of ventures all the time. Do you want to kind of describe what you think good looks like, and you know, if you can, without naming names or hurting anybody's feelings, maybe share a train wreck story of where things went horribly off the rails, and that kind of helps people understand where you fit in that product development flow.
I can give an example, and I'll name it myself as the way not to do it. So you know, putting a fence around this is for a battery technology, aqueous, so water, and nothing too harmful or crazy in it. There was nothing crazy going on. It was pretty straightforward and mundane. We tested it at a very small scale, mostly on grants, but we did it early and we didn't use enough grants. We didn't leverage non-dilutive funding the best way possible, because there was more that we left on the table, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars that we left on the table at early stage. And then we scaled it up. We got our seed round. We didn't check in on the investors' values when we took their money. And so they weren't, I think the expectation between the funder and us on the timeline of development, they were thinking software timelines, we were thinking chemistry timelines. So the communication was poor. And then we scaled that up one more time. And in order to scale it up one more time and actually get to a reasonable size, we hired everybody and did it all internally. We outsourced none of it. And it just wrecked us. We didn't have enough information from the customer. We didn't have enough information from the existing ecosystem of technologies that we would have to embed ourselves into. So we weren't thinking about market integration, not just market adoption, but integration. And we didn't do a techno-economic analysis. From a chemistry perspective, you need one. And it's one of the earliest things. So if I was to do it again, I would start at the early stage and try to do it in or around academia, because you get access to a lot more non-dilutive funding at that earliest stage of discovery from a chemistry perspective. But be careful about what patent office you talk to or tech transfer office you talk to, because different policies are at different stages. And then I would do a techno-economic analysis once I had the basic chemistry proven. That would be the first thing, because I need to understand where the money is from my technology. How does my technology connect to money, and then therefore connect to value to my end user and to the market? And once I have that articulated, then my fundraising and the growing is a lot easier. And then I would reach out to the rest of the world, the experts that have been doing this for eons, both from the market side to get customer discovery and market validation, but also from the product development side. In my case, the KPMs of the world that have been doing this for 20 years, doing chemical technology development for 20 years, and say, what do you guys think is required to scale this up? I know about 10% of this chemistry, and that's the secret sauce. You know the other 20% or 90% of the technology. What is required to get there? And have a good project plan with line items to be able to take to an investor and say, hey, pay for this, and this is how long it will take, and this is how much it will cost. And we'll get to the next stage, and there's clear communicable deliverables at the end. And then I would just iterate on that until eventually we were in market.
Awesome. Sebastian, I love the way you laid out both from what you did, and I would have to say, you know, your hindsight's 2020. You're being probably pretty hard on yourself, because it sounds like it went pretty well despite those things. But Billy, you sort of mentioned that iterative process in the middle where you're learning. And
yeah.
And sort of Sebastian sort of said you have to really understand your market. Souvik kind of said that as well. How do you tie in that learning in the middle of the process where, okay, now you've got an idea, you're testing what does and doesn't work, right? Because let's face it, not everything works the way we want it to the first time. What's your kind of, where have you seen product development done right in that stage?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sebastian talked about economics and working more, stay in the fume hood while you can, and develop that chemistry. And I also think you gotta do that, and you gotta then also start pulling them into the realities of scaling their technology. And when they scale it, that's when it rears its ugly head. So, and say they have process flow sheet. A good example here is we had one company where they had a process flow sheet and they wanted to build the whole pilot. So, you know, the circulation, the storage, the pump, the this, that. And at the end of the day, they were producing a foam, a surfactant foam kind of mixture. And we said, well, okay, it worked in the fume hood. Is it going to work at this flow rate? And they wanted to build everything and have a fully functional, fully automated data logging kind of, you know, containerized solution. And what we did is we forced them to do more bench testing. So out of the 7, say, unit operations in their process, one of them was the one that they didn't really know if it was going to work, and it was the secret sauce piece. So we said, well, let's de-risk your technology. Let's take your, you know, $100,000 and put it towards that versus, you know, going towards $1 million, you know, pilot the size of a bus. And so on the bench, we tested at the flow rates and scale to make sure it worked. And it wasn't working initially. So then we started like 3D printing, like unique mixing, static mixers and unique kind of devices that would enable their technology and try to de-risk it with some of the agile project development 3D printers that we have. So it's almost like taking the money they do have and spending it wisely and failing fast, learning through failure, but succeeding faster through a de-risking, learning kind of mindset versus I want to conquer the world and just build this, please and thank you. And I think that's a mindset that we need to shift them into, because that dollar is going to be put in the right spot every day.
Right. Souvik, how does that sort of resonate with what you see? And I know everyone's kind of maybe dealing with different technologies and scales, and you're sort of talking about AI and ML, and you know, might be different than the sort of time scales of chemistry and big flow reactions. What's similar for folks that you're kind of dealing with electronics manufacturing or software or the other kind of pieces?
It's actually, it resonates perfectly. In fact, Billy mentioned like quite a few useful concepts, de-risking, splitting it in phases, identifying what's the most critical component of technology that must work. If that doesn't work, the rest of the project doesn't even matter, right? So identifying that upfront and proving that is really the key, regardless of if it's let's say it's a machine learning algorithm. What's that key component of that algorithm that needs to work first? And the rest of them are kind of logistical, like, you know, it'll kind of work because people have already done that in so many different ways. So identification of that is key. One thing I would say, and this is where the software projects and hardware projects tend to differentiate a little bit. In software, we use mock-up tools, right? So when somebody wants to build a software, there's like, you know, many like free and paid tools available that can help build a mock-up. Even before building the actual software, you can create wireframes, or you can add buttons and fonts and colors to say, oh, this is how your software will look. It doesn't work yet, but this is the end product. And they might say, oh, this is too clumsy, this is, you know, too empty, etc. I want to stylize it a bit more, etc., etc. Hardware projects doesn't work like that, right? So somebody wants to build, let's say, a handheld device or like a smart home device. I don't know, for like a smart HVAC, you know, system. And until it's like built, they don't have the feel. They might say, oh, this doesn't have a premium feel to it. Oh, this is too light. This is, in fact, to quote one of our customers, oh, this doesn't feel heavy and therefore doesn't feel premium, you know. So obviously, like, so you have to basically, I don't know how to fast track this process, unfortunately. I mean, we can render things in CAD and produce like photorealistic rendering of like actual look products, but still, like, for hardware projects, there is a challenge.
Right.
From our experience.
that heaviness idea is funny. Like I remember the story of DeWalt that makes tools that go into the hardware store, and when they were developing it, they said you have to add weight to it, even though you probably should have a light tool. Add weight, people will buy it.
Yeah,
that's it's funny how the human brain works when it comes to buying, right?
Yeah, I can connect to that.
And that's why, like, models first before developing.
Yeah.
Whether it's a, you know, techno-economic analysis or a CAD drawing or rendering, right? Models first to help you identify what is the benefit that your goal is, and how do you connect that to the feature to tell yourself what is the most important feature that you have to work on? What is that aspect of technology that you have to work on first, and then successively de-risk? Yeah, I think we're all on the same page. It's great.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Billy, you were going to say something?
Oh no, just the models first. Absolutely. Like, I mean, we picked up one of the, like a color 3D printer, and you can make like a tool or something like a product, and it looks like a true marketing, colorful, functional device. And I think you're right. Get it in people's hands. Like, if it's software, obviously you can't put that in their hands, but you have to have more, creative ways to visualize that. But when it comes to prototypes, they need to put it in their hands and feel it and give you feedback right away. So.
Okay. I'm gonna ask a question from a kind of different angle. There's this saying that I like, perfection is the enemy of progress. And I know we've talked a lot about kind of de-risking and getting the thing working and getting the thing right. Do you see any of your client companies getting stuck in that trap where, here's maybe the spec for the market that they might buy it at, but the engineering team says, oh, we can make it, they'll buy it 86% efficient, but we can make this thing 88% efficient. Or, this thing has to have an MTBF of 50,000 hours, but I think we can make it 70,000 hours. Do you see sort of folks getting stuck in any traps there of not getting it out early enough, not sort of thinking that's okay, we can have a Rev 2 in 6 months or 12 months, but how do you sort of address that, or do you see that coming up with companies?
I can maybe give an example. We had one company that had a process technology and a flow sheet, and then we connected them with a major energy player to make their pitch, and we helped them with some of their visualizations and all their tests, and then when they pitched it, they had the full flow sheet, and it was the way they conceived it, from creation. And then when they pitched it, the customer was saying, well, I see a version of this that's simpler, and it's only about half your flow sheet, and I could implement it here in our facility probably sooner rather than later, until you've actually de-risked the whole flow sheet. And to me, it's that ability to listen and kind of coach the customer and say, hey, listen, they just said they want what you have here, but they want it to look like this. And I think they're willing to cut you a check, but it's really, again, it's that talking them off the ledge a bit and saying, they're so passionate about what they have that they want to they think that its journey is going to be as they conceived it all the way to fruition. And I think that's an important aspect of, feedback and transparency. Again, I keep going back to that transparency.
Right.
I mean, if I may add one example, especially in the world of machine learning, this happens all the time because people have been spoiled by the Googles of the world with 99.9% accurate models, be it like facial recognition or something else, right? But that's like machine learning as you see in movies. In real time, in real world with real data sets, achieving that kind of accuracy for any practical projects is very challenging, and the amount of data that needs to be collected and the cost associated with that whole process is ginormous. So that's where it's a reality check for people, saying like, okay, if you want to get to that kind of accuracy, it's going to happen, but not on day one. So you gotta bite the bullet. It's like, okay, what's good enough? Let's say 80% accuracy is probably good enough for like an engineering or the immediate application use case, and we gotta work towards that as a more achievable target, right? So yeah, I mean, this happens all the time. Like multiple companies, they come with the expectation of super accurate results or the trained models, but then we have to kind of talk transparently about what's involved. And what we realized is that when we make people aware of the costs or the implications, then they take it in a good spirit and say, okay, because some misinformation sometimes leads to these kind of expectations.
Yeah. And I think every time that I've ever run into a situation where maybe there's a misalignment there, it normally stems from one of two things. It normally stems from a technologist who's forgotten to think about the goal, or why are you doing this, right? What is at the end? Are you trying to save costs, or are you trying to be the best? Well, if you're being the best, normally you can't save costs. If you're trying to be cheaper, then you can't be the best. More often than not. Sometimes there's special cases. But right, so loading it up with features and then also claiming that you're going to be cheaper than the alternative is like, well, come on, right? So knowing where you position yourself, what the goal is, and like, to Billy's point, what problem are you solving, and can you solve that the best way possible, right? Do you need that flow sheet, or can you do it quicker this way?
In fact, like the analogy, it might be cheesy, but like the analogy that I give is, do you want glasses or do you want to see better? Sometimes they're like hung on like something very specific, but then
that's perfect. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, I'll use that too. You want rose-colored glasses, or do you want to see better? I think that I think another missing concept sometimes with startups is that iteration, the concept of iteration. And you talk about this, great is the enemy of the good, and spending the money wisely. And they have a team of people, and they say, well, let's run it at this temperature and pressure because I think it might have a better yield, or let's run it here. And then they're kind of saying, well, no, we're going to run exactly at this. And I think you got to get them into that maximization of learning mode and saying, well, I think you're all right. Don't judge, and just say, everybody has a valid point. So we're going to kind of test these 3 different shapes when we run a flow test. And we're not going to do a battery of 12 tests with one shape. We're going to make 3 or 4, like we've done up to 12 shapes in the flow loop to say that, well, now we like these 2, and then they narrow it down to another 2, or like, we like these 3 and they narrow it down. It's really getting them. They did this because they love experimentation. I think as they get further in their journey, they're so impatient. They want to move faster, and they forget that they're geared for experimentation, but they're not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
And I think iteration is definitely missing sometimes.
And an iteration around a structure or framework as well.
Yes, A/B testing, or absolutely, yeah.
There's so many tools available and so much literature around the project management styles that you can do to push these forward, that, if you feel lost as the first time founder, go read. There's stuff. and you can look at things like PMI for that, Project Management Institute. But I'd also say, no, on top of that, reading what stage you should be at as kind of an external measure. TRLs, technology readiness levels, are a great standard way of all of us chatting about where technology is at, but also the expectation of how de-risked that technology is. I'm not going to hold a TRL 7 company to the same standard as somebody who's in TRL 3. We're going to have very different conversations. In TRL 7, I expect you to have some things down. And we're going to focus on the most critical things on your technology to get you in front of an end user or delivering product to an end user. At TRL 3, we're going to talk airy-fairy of like, well, what about this? Let's do that A/B testing. We still have room. Let's build that into the model, right? So it's a lot less sensitive at the later stages or earlier stages.
There's a time and a place for everything. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's it.
Awesome. Souvik, how do you feel about the TRL scale? I've sometimes heard complaints about people from the software side of the world. Like, I think it, was originally designed by NASA to put rockets in space with this big chunks of iron that need to do specific things. And I've heard complaints that with the agile model for software, TRLs aren't as relevant. How do you sort of feel? Because I think it's a language you have to speak. I don't know if they're on the call, but because of government funders, for the very least. But do you, and Sebastian, thank you for pointing out that you actually find a useful model to think about. Souvik, do you sort of feel the same way?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, software or hardware doesn't matter. I think some of the concepts are very transferable, and towards the end it becomes a little blurry. Like, okay, are we in 6 or 7 or 8? I mean, that's debate we can have. But I think some of the concepts that are really critical is prototyping in a lab, and then prototyping in an actual operating environment, then converting that prototype into a mass scale product, and then doing that in a lab and then in an actual environment. So these concepts are there. So for example, for a software, you can prototype by only like a critical feature set of the software, and the lab could be a virtual machine or your laptop. And then the actual deployment environment could be a AWS server for that matter, right? Where you're simulating like thousands of people coming to your, whatever it is, web application or whatever that the software might be doing. And obviously same applies to hardware directly, lab versus outdoor harsh weather condition, whatever the system is designed for. So I think the concepts are very transferable and very relevant. So even if you don't stick to a specific, okay, we are in tier 6, 7, 8, you need to have a general sense of how your technology will progress from like an early stage to a more mature stage, and have a roadmap of how Sebastian was mentioning, kind of narrow gets basically narrower as you go further down this path, right? So there's room for experimentation, room for throwing in novel concepts, ideas at the earliest stages, but as and when you are getting towards the final stage, room for experimentation is very narrow, and therefore more focus is required. So,
and the narrowing, I think, is a function of customer expectations, because as you get further down, you're getting closer to the customer, but also a function of it gets freaking expensive the later you go, right? The more evolved the product is, the more intense the simulated or real environment is, the more expensive it gets. And so you just can't afford to at the end.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about like, okay, can we design it in a way so that we can add more bells and whistles later on? I mean, this always kind of in the thought process, be it, so from electronics perspective, like some people might say, I'm building a device and day one, I don't need like Bluetooth or wireless communication, but while I'm at it, why don't I add the chipsets today? And in future, it'll be just a matter of like writing the firmware that enables this form of communication, which is okay. But if you want to add GPS, okay, well, now I have to redesign my PCB because it doesn't have a GPS chip. How else it's gonna add that functionality, right? So something like this can really, bite us back if we don't think of it earlier stages, and it becomes very expensive. Then again, you have to redesign your PCB, going back to supply chain, manufacture again, and more time, more cost, more delays.
My view these days is similar to when we talk about the TRL levels. I think innovation happens throughout the whole cycle, and it just shifts. Like, I think as you get closer to the end of the cycle, you're more into business model innovation and maybe less on the hardware. Like, so when you look at the panelists here, we got products, process technology, we got software, we got the whole gamut of capabilities here to help customers develop their technology. But, and this might sound like a little bit of a plug for Foresight, but hey, you guys invited us to the call, is how do they portray themselves? Are they selling this? Are they renting it? How does the market want to purchase this product? Is there volume pricing? Is there, the scalability of it? And it just, that whole, we're, as a bunch of engineers, we like to work on the hardware and the software and the goods. But there is a place for the people with the MBAs and the business degrees to help these startups, because that is a gap in their, typically a gap in their thinking, is that business acumen and that. But the business model innovation, to me, is, especially these days, you look at Amazon, you look at, like, it's a real thing. It's not about the thing, it's about how it's delivered. And I think we have to spend time there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, no, I think you're very right. I think there's an opportunity there. And certainly, Billy, I love what you said earlier, where, if somebody wants to buy a piece of it earlier, give them that piece earlier. If they want to pay for it in a certain way, listen to the customer. The customer knows what they want and what they need and how they want to pay for it and how many they want to buy. And if you can be listening and asking good questions, you can sort of uncover those things. And looking around you and seeing what other creative folks have done to kind of overcome those obstacles of, well, I can't pay for it right now. Okay, well, can we lease it to you? Can we, have hardware as a service? Can we do this over time? How can we kind of meet you where it is you are?
Yeah, flexibility is key. Yeah.
I did kind of want to explore, and we've kind of touched on it a couple of times, like, in that product development, you have to get towards that scaled, commercially available, huge thing. But have you seen great examples of people who got to an MVP, something that was, maybe had some warts on it? And then there's a wonderful saying from one of the other folks here at Foresight, Jason Jones, that if you're not a little bit embarrassed of your first version, then you probably waited too long. Do you sort of see, how do you view that? How do you see your customers approaching that? Do they sort of send some things out with some warts on it to get the customers validated? Like, will you pay for this? Does it really solve a key problem to you that means we should keep going? Or do you sort of recommend, like, let's perfect it, let's make sure they're super happy with it?
From the reaction house perspective, and then my other stuff as a consultant in BC, we don't do pilots unless they're paid. We are contributing value. The company, the technology, the service provider is providing value to the multinational end user, client, whatever the relationship is, by telling them, hey, we think we can solve your problem, and doing it, giving them the external capacity to do that. It's external innovation, right? And so you can come to the table, hey, we think it will solve X problem. This is what we think the quantifiable delta of value will be. And you have to have that. That's why models are important. This is how much time we think it will take to test. This is how much we think it will cost. And this is what the project looks like. Do you want to know whether or not you can save 5% off the top of every unit that you sell? The answer is almost always yes. And if you're asking for a couple $100,000, maybe it's not the full cost of the pilot, maybe it's a subsidized version of the pilot. But what that allows you to do as a founder is it allows you to save more of your equity, because you're going to need it later on, whether that's for talent or for more fundraising, or for yourself, because you worked hard, right? And that also allows you to get some revenue in the door, more traction, looks better for funders. It just increases the dynamic, right? So always in my asterisk here is always go in to a piloting or client relationship with honesty and create that trust, like we were talking about earlier, and recognize and know the value that you bring to the table. If you bring no value to the table, don't go to the table. You're going to lose, right? Because you're in a position of only asking. So just work on that value prop, I think.
But is it okay to go with things to learn? Like, you're sort of saying, we're going to learn, like, we think it's going to do this, but we're probably going to learn some stuff because it's not perfect, right? Like, that's
the learning part should be for both of you, that you both have the question, hey, does my process actually work? Can these guys save me money, or save me time, or save me effort, or save me something, right? Savings is at least, or add value, right? So it's that same question, and both partners in a piloting opportunity should be aligned on that question, and both parties should feel that there's equal value in answering that question.
awesome. Billy, what's your perspective on that? Same sort of, same sort of view. I mean, you have all these wonderful, I'll call them tools now, after you've corrected me, to make it faster and cheaper and easier to get things out in the field and try them multiple times. Is your advice, or do you see the successful companies pursuing a similar strategy? Like, we've got this thing, it's really good for you. You have to help us test it. You have to help us answer these questions together.
Yeah. I think that together is probably a bigger together with a capital T, right? And ideally, like, when you look at the hub concept, and we operate in a very similar way. It's not just two parties, like being the enabler, like Exergy and the clean tech startup or whatnot. It's also the potential adopter, pulling them in, making them part of the journey. And I think that big industry has lost its ability to collaborate. They've never really thought that way. They work at really big scale. They're running big businesses, and there's always a handful of what I call entrepreneurs that are in big industry that are itching to. They feel like they wish they were in a startup, but they got the golden handcuffs, and often we'll pull them into the fold, into the right into the mix of the action earlier in the game. And I think that's key. Like when you talk about energy transition and you talk about this is energy evolution, right? This is us changing the flow sheet for everything we do, energy. And this is a together thing. Like last time I checked, global warming was a problem for everyone on this planet, maybe except for the people that are building rockets to leave the planet. But there's a handful of money, there's a lot of money being spent there. But I feel like we need to kind of really take a community approach to this, and the community is a lot bigger than we think. So yeah, I don't know, that probably doesn't really answer the question. It's just a bit more holistic kind of view that I have.
No, I liked it. Find your internal champion, find someone who cares about what you're doing. And if they see themselves as a partner in it, then they might be happy with, funding a part of the development, or certainly, making sure that you get the feedback and the communication you need. Because part of it is not just like throw it over the wall and see if it works. If the pilot doesn't go well, are they really invested in solving the problem and are going to let you try it again? Are they going to let you do the analysis? Are they giving you the data up front? I think you're absolutely bang on, Billy. It's about finding those people who are passionate about, supporting your project.
Yeah.
It's kind of what I heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And then like pretty much every grant out there, it requires an industry player that wants to take your tech and run with it. So, and I think that's good business, and that's good use of taxpayer money, because it can get some matching funds from the industrial player. And so a lot of these kind of programs have been designed to make sure there is like kind of three point of engagement or more to drive this thing forward. And again, that it's also not just the TRLs, it's maybe I'll coin this a BRL, business readiness level of sorts. And it probably exists. I didn't make that up, but I mean, I think they talk business too. This entrepreneur needs to be ready to talk business and talk techno-economics and all the goodies that Sebastian and Souvik brought up.
Sorry, I was just typing. There are commercial readiness levels. There's a scale there you can look at. It starts around TRL6, I think, if you try to line them up.
Okay.
I haven't spent a ton of time looking at it, but yeah, there's some thought around that. Souvik, any kind of thoughts around that MVP in the software space? Do you get people to pay for stuff if it's just ones and zeros?
Absolutely, they should pay. And I think it's from both perspectives, right? So one thing I would say, when you're a young startup, you're trying to establish the business and the technology, sustained revenue is important. So for a product company, there is that hockey stick curve, like where they have to spend money to get it to a mature stage where they can start selling. That I have seen people get really creative at that. So if you are not embarrassed, is not the right word, but if you are okay selling something which is probably a well-established technology today, making some money, meanwhile making the next big technical improvement that will make you completely way ahead of the rest of the pack, you can keep working on that. Meanwhile, sell what's already other people are selling today. Some people think it's a defeat, and they don't want to do that. They want to come out as that unique technology offering that completely trumps everything else that's out there. I don't think that's the right approach, because more often than not, they'll burn themselves out in that whole process, right? So it's better to just take small steps, get some revenue going. Meanwhile, it's a lot more work, obviously, for the entrepreneurs to manage both sides, but it's still better than waiting too long and then just missing the bus altogether. So that's, I think, is really a key aspect to this. And one other thing I would say is in terms of assessing value proposition and finding that right early stage friendly, customer friendly adapter, there are tools available to do this kind of analysis. And one thing that I particularly found very useful when I was kind of coming up to speed with this concept was something called business model canvas. This is developed by a gentleman called Steve Blanks. Some of you may know him. He's a professor in Stanford, or used to be. I'm not sure if he's still in Stanford, but he developed this concept called business model canvas, where it has basically 9 sections. One section is value proposition, one section is customer segment, and your exercise is to basically map your value propositions to customer segments through interviews. Like basically go out and talk to people and subtly ask questions to validate if these value propositions really make sense with this customer segment or not. And then you will find your friendly early adopter through this exercise if you try hard enough. So that's the idea.
Stephen, I think there's probably a program or something that helps startups do that.
I was actually going to say, for all the people on the call, I did not prompt Souvik to say that. I didn't pay him to bring that up.
There you go.
But certainly that is something that we
First,
take
a message from our sponsor
in 6 weeks, kind of in our launch program, just basically thinking through all those different 9 boxes, because they
super
are
critical. It's really
if you can figure out what it is you think is going to work, and then figure out a way to test if it's actually going to work, you're on your way to building kind of a profitable, scalable business. And the thing that I see time and again is understanding what those assumptions are means you can have a backup plan, and you can pivot when new information presents itself, because as everyone here sort of said, it is an iterative process. It's an iterative process on the technical side, and it's an iterative process on the customer side of saying like, hey, we've got this great big thing, and to Billy's example, well, they're happy to just buy the front end of it, right? And you can sell that today. So let's get that going, right? It might be, but the customer wants something to do. Okay, great. Well, I guess we'll be flexible with that. And that's what understanding those pieces, I think, really gives. We've got a couple minutes left. If you had a quick piece of advice, what is one thing you wish people did to move their product to market faster? 30 seconds or less. I'll go. Billy, do you have a quick one thing that would make your life and the customer's life and the product development people's lives easier?
Yeah, don't give up, I guess. I mean, people need encouragement. There's ups and downs in entrepreneurship, and I would say just resilience, and you'll have good days and bad days. Just don't give up.
Awesome. I like it. Sebastian.
Don't forget about the relationship. Yeah, you can absolutely have a great product, but if you can't get it to the person that wants to buy it, or get in contact with the person that wants to buy it, then you have nothing.
Awesome. I've heard, it's interesting. I've heard you talk a lot about trust to your suppliers and your technology partners, build trust with your customers. And so really kind of put that at the forefront. Souvik, any thoughts from your side?
I would say timing. Both of the thoughts that Sebastian and Billy mentioned is good, but I think timing is also another critical aspect. Don't wait for doing something. Do it now. Do it yesterday. Timing is really important.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your sage advice over the last hour. I think for everybody on the call, remember, there are folks who are, passionate about the space, passionate about helping other people, and kind of have tools, expertise, and experience in helping you along that way. Figure out what it is your 10% is that you're the best at, and see how you can get that other 90% as quickly, efficiently, and cheaply as possible. Be that with, chemistry, with physical mechanical parts, with software, with electronics. There's somebody out there who will help you get your product to market faster, and don't be afraid to ask, because they are honestly in the business of helping. And I think that that's something I'm really happy to see came across loud and clear here. For those of you who are interested, oh, look at that. Astrid just putting that up there. We are back on November 10th. Talking about structuring for the US. Once you get that product in there, or before if you want to sell it into the US, there are some thoughts around that. So do join us for part 2 of that conversation on November 9th. And with that, gentlemen, thank you very much. That was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. We should do this more often.
Anytime.
Anytime. Thank you so much, Stephen. And thank you, Sebastian. Thank you, Billy. Learned a lot of good stuff.
Right on.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.